When I first opened the Qur'an, I expected contradictions, doubts, maybe even disappointment. But what I discovered about Jesus shook me so deeply that it made me question everything I thought I knew. This isn't the Jesus I was taught in church. This was something far greater. Like many others raised in a Christian background, I had an image of Jesus that was formed by tradition, church teachings, and sermons repeated every Sunday. Jesus was the Son of God, part of the Trinity, the one who died for sins. This was the foundation of my faith, and in my mind, the Qur'an could only deny him or ignore him altogether. But when I actually read it, the shock was overwhelming. The Qur'an doesn't reject Jesus at all. In fact, it honors him in ways I never imagined. The Qur'an speaks about Jesus not as a forgotten figure, but as one of the greatest messengers of God. It describes his miraculous birth, his powerful message, his incredible miracles, and even his future return before the end of time. But the most striking difference is this: the Qur'an removes the confusion of divinity and restores Jesus to his original role, not as God, but as a prophet who called people to worship the one and only God. That was the moment everything I thought I knew began to crumble. Because if Jesus himself never claimed to be divine, then why had I spent my whole life believing otherwise? If he always pointed people back to God, then how had his message been changed into something so different from what he originally taught? The Qur'an doesn't portray Jesus as a figure to divide people, but as a unifier, a man chosen by God to deliver truth. His story in the Qur'an is powerful, yet beautifully simple. There are no mysteries of three in one, no contradictions about his nature, no theological puzzles that don't make sense. Instead, the Qur'an paints Jesus as a man of purity, born of a virgin by God's command, performing miracles by God's permission, and preaching a message of worshiping the same one God who sent all prophets. And the shock didn't end there. The more I read, the more I realized how much the Qur'an cleared the doubts I once had. It answered questions I had carried for years, questions that no sermon or Bible study ever truly resolved. Why did Jesus pray to God if he was God? Why did he say, "The Father is greater than I"? Why did he never clearly declare divinity? The Qur'an's version of Jesus finally gave me the answers that had been hidden in plain sight. It was like meeting Jesus again for the first time, but this time without filters, without man-made doctrines, without confusion. This was Jesus as he was meant to be known, the Messiah, the servant of God, a sign of mercy, and a bringer of truth. And realizing that changed not only how I saw Jesus, but how I saw faith itself. This journey shook me, challenged me, and humbled me. Because what I discovered in the Qur'an wasn't a rejection of Jesus. It was a rediscovery of the real Jesus, the one who never stopped pointing humanity to the one who sent him. And that discovery was the beginning of a transformation I never expected. One of the first and most powerful shocks I experienced when I read the Qur'an was how it described Jesus. In Christianity, Jesus is often presented as more than human, the Son of God, part of a divine Trinity, and even God himself. This was the foundation of everything I believed. But when I opened the Qur'an, I was confronted with a very different and deeply eye-opening perspective. Jesus was never God, never divine, but rather a prophet and messenger chosen by God to guide people to the truth. At first, this was hard to accept. My mind had been trained for years to see Jesus as divine. But as I continued reading, I noticed something powerful. The Qur'an didn't reduce Jesus' status, it elevated it in a way that made more sense. It honored him as one of the greatest prophets, a man born miraculously without a father, a servant of God filled with purity and strength, and someone given a special mission. In Islam, being a prophet is not a small role. It is the highest rank a human being can achieve. This perspective shocked me because it resolved many contradictions I had struggled with as a Christian. If Jesus was God, why did he pray to God? Why did he say that God was greater than him? Why did he depend on food, sleep, and protection like every other human? The Qur'an's description made sense of these questions. It showed that Jesus was fully human yet divinely chosen, empowered by God to perform miracles and deliver a message. Another thing that struck me was how Islam's view of Jesus brought him closer to the other prophets, like Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Muhammad's peace be upon them all. Each one came with the same core messages: worship the one God and follow his guidance. Jesus was not outside of this chain, he was part of it. This unity among prophets felt so pure and consistent, unlike the divided and confusing image of Jesus I had before. What shocked me most was realizing that seeing Jesus as a prophet didn't lessen his greatness, it revealed it. Instead of being worshipped, he was respected, loved, and followed for the truth he carried. And that truth was never about himself. It was always about the one God who sent him. One of the most shocking discoveries I made in the Qur'an was how strongly it confirmed the miraculous virgin birth of Jesus. Growing up in Christianity, I thought this belief was unique to the Bible, a proof of Jesus' divinity, something that made him different from everyone else. So when I first opened the Qur'an, I half expected it to dismiss or deny this idea, but instead, the Qur'an not only confirmed the virgin birth, it described it with such detail and respect that I was left amazed. In the Qur'an, Mary's Maryam Sironi Fi is honored with an entire chapter named after her, something not even found in the Bible. Her purity, devotion, and faith are celebrated as an example for all believers. When the angel appeared to her with the news that she would bear a son, Mary was shocked. She asked the very human question, "How can I have a child when no man has touched me?" The answer was simple yet profound. God only has to say, "Be," and it is. Jesus' birth was not proof of his divinity, but proof of God's limitless power. This completely changed the way I saw the story. In Christianity, the virgin birth was often used as evidence that Jesus must be divine. But in the Qur'an, it was shown as a miracle. Just like Adam, who was created without a father or mother, and just like Eve, who was created from Adam, none of them are worshipped as divine. Instead, their creation is a reminder of God's ability to do anything. Another shocking part was how the Qur'an defended Mary's honor. In history, she was accused and slandered, but the Qur'an clears her name with powerful verses, describing her as one of the most righteous women to ever live. This was moving because it showed how much respect Islam gives to the mother of Jesus, not only protecting her dignity, but raising her to a status above almost all women in history. The virgin birth in the Qur'an didn't make Jesus divine, it made God's power undeniable. It was a miracle that pointed to the Creator, not to the creation. And realizing this was one of the moments I felt the Qur'an was not dismissing Jesus, but giving me a clearer, pure understanding of his true story. Another moment that shocked me when I read the Qur'an was the way it described the miracles of Jesus. In Christianity, these miracles are often presented as proof of his divinity, healing the blind, curing lepers, raising the dead. For years, I believed these acts showed that Jesus was God in human form. But in the Qur'an, I encountered something completely different and far more logical. The Qur'an acknowledges Jesus' miracles clearly. It doesn't deny them, it doesn't minimize them. In fact, it even adds details the Bible doesn't mention. For example, the Qur'an describes how, as a child, Jesus shaped a bird out of clay and brought it to life by God's permission. This miracle isn't found in the Bible, yet it shows the same theme that runs through every miracle. Jesus never acted independently. Every miracle happened only by the will and permission of God. This was a huge shift for me. Instead of seeing Jesus as the source of divine power, the Qur'an showed him as a servant and prophet who was chosen to demonstrate God's power. His miracles were signs, not of his own divinity, but of the Creator who sent him. Just like Moses split the sea and Abraham was saved from fire, Jesus performed miracles that amazed people, but all of them were done through God, not through human power. This perspective resolved a contradiction I had always felt but never admitted. If Jesus was truly God, why would he need to say that his power came from somewhere else? Why would he constantly point people back to God? The Qur'an's explanation made sense. Jesus was a prophet, so his role was not to point to himself but to point to God. His miracles were never meant to make people worship him, but to strengthen faith in the one who sent him. The most shocking part was how the Qur'an repeated this phrase over and over: seek, by God's permission. It left no room for confusion. Every healing, every miracle, every act of wonder, all of it was a gift from God, not proof of divinity. And suddenly, Jesus became even more inspiring to me. He wasn't someone to worship, but someone to learn from, a prophet whose life was a living reminder that all power belongs only to God. Perhaps the most shocking realization I had when reading the Qur'an was this: Jesus never once claimed to be God. Growing up in church, I had always been taught the opposite. Sermons and hymns constantly repeated that Jesus was divine, that he was the Son of God, that salvation depended on believing this. But when I read the Qur'an, I found a different story. one that was consistent, logical, and deeply powerful. The Qur'an makes it crystal clear that Jesus never invited people to worship him. Instead, he always called people to worship the one true God. Verses describe him as saying, "Indeed, Allah is my Lord and your Lord, so worship him." This is the straight path. For me, this was a direct challenge to everything I had been taught. If Jesus himself pointed only to God, then where did the idea of his divinity come from? The Qur'an also addresses the misunderstandings that developed after Jesus. It explains how people exaggerated his status and raised him beyond what he himself ever claimed. This struck me because, even in the Bible, I could recall verses where Jesus distanced himself from divinity, when he prayed for help, when he said, "The Father is greater than I," or when he admitted he did not know the hour of the last day. These verses had always made me uncomfortable as a Christian because they didn't fit the doctrine I was taught. But in the Qur'an, everything clicked into place. Jesus was a prophet, and those statements made perfect sense from that perspective. What truly shocked me was how the Qur'an portrays a future conversation between God and Jesus on the Day of Judgment. God asks him if he ever told people to worship him or his mother. Jesus replies that he never did, and that he only told people to worship God, his Lord and theirs. That moment hit me hard because it was so clear, so direct, it felt like the answer to all the doubts I had carried for years. This understanding didn't make me respect Jesus less. In fact, it made me respect him more. He wasn't claiming titles for himself, he was humbly fulfilling his mission. The Qur'an showed me a Jesus who was pure, devoted, and truthful. A prophet who always pointed people to the one true God, never to himself. One of the most unexpected and shocking things I discovered in the Qur'an and Islamic teachings was this: Jesus is not dead. Unlike the Christian narrative that teaches Jesus was crucified and resurrected, the Qur'an presents a different reality. It explains that Jesus was neither killed nor crucified, but instead, God raised him up and protected him from his enemies. And even more shocking, Jesus will return before the end of times. At first, this was difficult to process. My entire life, I had believed the story of crucifixion and resurrection as the foundation of Christianity. But when I read the Qur'an, I saw a perspective that not only denied crucifixion, but also gave Jesus a future role. Islam teaches that Jesus was lifted alive into the heavens, and that near the end of the world, he will return to restore justice, defeat falsehood, and unite people under the worship of one God. What amazed me most was how this teaching connected to the universal message of all prophets. Jesus' mission was never to create division or establish a new religion separate from God's message. Instead, his return will confirm the truth of Islam, the same message preached by Abraham, Moses, and Muhammad's peace be upon them all, that God is one, without partners. This made me realize that in Islam, Jesus' story isn't finished. It's ongoing. Another shocking aspect was how Islam portrays Jesus' second coming. He will return not as a new lawgiver or founder of a religion, but as a follower of the final prophet Muhammad, affirming the truth of the Qur'an. This humility and obedience to God's plan showed me a side of Jesus I had never known, a man of honor, power, and submission to God's will until the very end. This teaching not only cleared the confusion about crucifixion, but also gave me a stronger sense of hope. Jesus' return is a reminder that justice will prevail, truth will shine, and humanity will once again be guided by a prophet chosen by God. What shocked me most was that Islam didn't reject Jesus. It honored him with a role so important that he will play a part in the final chapter of human history. That realization forever changed how I viewed him. The more I read the Qur'an, the more I realized it wasn't pushing Jesus away, it was bringing me closer to him. Not the version shaped by centuries of debate, councils, and doctrines, but the real Jesus, the humble servant of God, the prophet of truth, the Messiah who called people to worship the one who sent him. What shocked me most was that Islam didn't take Jesus away from me, it gave him back to me. It gave me a Jesus without contradictions, without confusion, without mystery. A Jesus who made sense. A Jesus who prayed, who obeyed, who submitted to God. A Jesus who wasn't asking to be worshipped, but who was showing us how to worship. And when I saw this, everything changed. The questions I carried for years finally had answers. The doubts I buried inside finally had clarity. And the love I had for Jesus only grew stronger, because now I knew him as he truly was. Leaving the Bible for the Qur'an didn't mean I left Jesus. It meant I found him, not as God, not as part of a trinity, but but as the prophet, the Messiah, and the sign of God's mercy to the world. And that realization, that shocking, life-changing truth, was the beginning of a faith that gave me peace, certainty, and a connection to God I had never felt before. Because the Qur'an didn't just tell me about Jesus, it helped me finally understand him.